Hi, and welcome to another episode of Twice as Hard. I'm Janelle Benjamin, founder and CEO of All Things Equitable. Pleasure to have you watching with us. Don't forget to click the like button down below before we even begin. I am here today, really honored to be with Theresa M. Robinson. She is a fantastic anti-racism educator. She is an author of an incredible book, Blaxhaustion, Karen's and Other Threats to Black Lives. And Theresa, I'm just really happy to have you here with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be able to chat with you, Janelle.
I know, finally we get to touch base. We've been connected for quite some time on LinkedIn, and I think we just connected organically shortly after what happened with George Floyd. And I think you were pivoting your career. I was also pivoting my career. Of course, working twice as hard, as Black women do. Tell me a little bit about what you were doing previously and then what you transitioned to through the pandemic.
Wow. So before the pandemic, Janelle, I was totally an in-person educator and facilitator. And it's so ironic because typically when people would ask me, do you do anything virtually? I would always say no, and I wouldn't even consider it. So I was 100%. So with me being 100%, you can imagine what life became like once the shutdown came into place. And to be quite honest with you, I have not gone back to in person. I am 100% virtual now. But I will tell you, for me, virtual is much harder than the in-person. It is much harder. And I know people may be shocked to hear that, but for me, it is hugely more difficult.
Tell me some of the reasons why. What are you finding?
Okay. So first and foremost, with in-person, I think you get more of a holistic experience. There's more texture, there's more context. You're not just a singular person on a screen where everybody's focus is on you at all times. There's just, like I said, there's background, there's context, there's texture. You are a snapshot. There are other things going on. I think all of that adds to the overall experience. And it takes a lot of burden off of the facilitator that there are other things going on. There are other things that can capture your sensory attention without taking away from the content. And because I don't like to be in the spotlight and I don't like it to be about me, the virtual is very, very difficult for me.
Yeah, we don't get to sort of move around a space and see faces, particularly if cameras are off. All eyes are on us, and I'm an introvert myself, so it's really uncomfortable for me to be the focus or center of attention. So I totally understand. And I know, Theresa, that you've been working extremely hard, and that's what this series is all about. Doing a variety of things. You've got an amazing book. Why don't you share a little bit about Blaxhaustion for people who don't know what it's all about? I'm really blessed that you chose to feature a little snippet of my viewpoints on Karen's and the threats to Black lives. But why don't you
you beat me to the punch. You totally beat me to the punch, because I was actually going to remind folks that you are one of my featured sister queens. Yes. This book actually was, I think, years and years and years into the making. I feel like it was always one of those books that you just have inside of you, and then you just need that pivotal moment for it to just be birthed. But I knew that it wasn't going to be just about me and my lived experiences. I knew I wanted to draw in the lived experiences of other Black women. So for me, this book was both for us, by us, about us, keeping us at the focus. It was almost like a love letter to Black women, but it was also an opportunity for us to come together and share. But it was also an opportunity for us to just validate what we feel and to take back some of what we may have inadvertently given away. It was an opportunity for us to have a voice and to have it unapologetically, because as you know, in this book, I shared a lot of truths.
Yes.
I also let people know things that I had been struggling with. I developed beginning in 2016, and I'll let folks take from that what they may. I developed this really, really bad habit of cussing. And for people that have known me for years, they actually were shocked. Theresa, cussing and cussing like a sailor, quote unquote. I literally just felt like I just gravitated toward just all the dumb fuckery going on, all the bleep, bleep and bleak and blip. It was just really, really bad. But you know what? At the same time, because I shared that in the book and I really didn't hold back around what was going on and where that was, was coming from, I felt like it was just an opportunity to kind of unburden in a cathartic kind of way. And of course, here we are now in 2022, and I'm happy to report that I have gotten that under control with a lot of help. But I think the funniest thing about that habit that I developed, Janelle, is one day in a grocery store, something was going on. I'm one of those people that when it comes to something like public health and the mandates that were put out around the importance of masks, and when the rules came out that you should wear the mask in public. And if I go into a store and there's a sign on the door that says everybody that enters these premises must wear a mask, I'm one of those people, I take that to heart. I want to follow those rules, and I want everybody else to follow those rules. So one day my husband and I were in this grocery store, and as I'm walking around, I'm noticing there were just too many people without their masks on. And in my head, I'm counting them. I'm literally taking names and I'm counting. And every single person, Janelle, and based on the work that I do and based on some of the other lived experiences that we've heard about, every single person that did not have on a mask was non-melanated. And we'll just leave it at that. So at a certain point, I lost my shit. And I just started just cussing and just complaining to my husband and just blah, blah. And all of a sudden, my husband just looked at me and he said something to me. I won't go into the details, but basically what happened in that public space was an intervention. That's when I realized that I had a problem with all the cussing that I've been doing. And I would say that that was the day, funny as it was, but yet not funny, that I started to kind of get that back under control. Every now and then I have a relapse, based on what's going on, and based on, how much bandwidth I have on any given day. But that was funny for me. So the book, in a lot of ways, was just a combination of just all of that. Plus, it just gave me an opportunity to work through some things that weren't just about the racial climate that we've been living in. It also allowed me just some personal reflection time to come to grips with some things about me that I'm still processing. It's still a journey for me. And for those of you that have read that book, you know that I shared with everybody that I am a late diagnosed autistic. That diagnosis officially came out just a couple of months before the first shutdown. So I was still grappling with that diagnosis and trying to process it. And then the pandemic happened. And then my career just totally came to a halt. And then I had to figure it out. So there was a lot going on. So I think in a lot of ways, this book, which I spent, like I said, it was really a lifetime birthing, but I spent a lot of time in 2020 pouring things into this book. In a lot of ways, I think you might say it saved me. You know, it was very pivotal in saving me and helping me to process through that, because it was a lot, and it still is. I'm still processing.
Okay.
A lot of people still don't know I'm autistic because it's not something that I volunteer often and I don't talk about. But lately I've been getting a lot more courage from an unlikely place.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm hoping.
Where's that?
The unlikely place, Janelle, is my son, my young adult son, who also is autistic.
Okay.
A big part of my diagnosis came from his diagnosis. And of course, his story is not my story to share, but his story is very much my story, because his diagnosis came before mine. And we were on a journey with his, and it was through everything that we were learning that it became clear that, Theresa, I think you might also be autistic. So a part of me was coming to grips with that. And then another part of me was like, nah.
Yeah.
So I think a big part of me was in denial around it. But I had a serious anxiety attack at a major airport. I mean, it was so major that it sent me to a therapist.
Wow.
And based on everything that came out of being in therapy, like I shared in the book, she basically just looked at me and she said, Theresa, have you ever been tested for autism? I want to test you. And I was just absolutely speechless. And of course, I had been sitting there the whole time pouring out a story to her and tears just rolling down my eyes. And I thought I was telling her one thing about the anxiety and the stress, because, you know, in addition to being autistic, I'm also extremely introverted. And a lot of people don't realize that as well. I'm extremely introverted. And I typically avoid things like podcasts. So I'm sitting there pouring out my story to her, thinking I'm telling her a story about being stressed and overwhelmed and introverted and the anxiety. And she's going through all of that and taking notes. And based on all of that, she asked me, have you ever been tested for autism? And I'm like, what? But to make a long story short, we went through the test and I was pretty much off the charts. The only thing that was missing from my like spot on diagnosis is that she didn't get the opportunity to interview my parents, because that's usually a major part of being officially diagnosed with autism. And that had been a part of my son's journey, because my husband and I were a big part of providing his therapist with information from his childhood that helped them to. So she had to rely on my memory of things that I remember being said to me, things that I remember doing. And she said, you know, we can't say 100% that you're autistic, because that piece from your mom and your dad are missing. But in all honesty, Theresa, I just want to tell you, you are autistic. So that began another journey for me. So
I wanted to ask you a little bit about that and just the historical piece. As you reflect now on that diagnosis, can you think about maybe some of the ways that has presented itself in your life, and that you've had to work twice as hard to overcome that aspect of your ability?
Yeah. That's a huge part of it for me. And that's a part that I'm still processing, because, you know, I am one of 3 girls. My mom was a single parent. And one of the things that she always instilled in us was, you've got to be at least twice as good to be considered half as good. And because you're females, I'm going to add even more on top of that. So my mom was extremely, extremely hard on the 3 of us. But here's what's so interesting about that time that I was growing up under that whole directive, because, you know, we took that to heart. We lived and breathed that we had to be better, so much better. At the time, my mom didn't know I was autistic. I didn't know I was autistic. I think at a certain point in my childhood, there was a piece of me that realized that I was different, but I took the different to mean this is something I've got to manage and to master because I've got to be able to compete with white people. So whatever this is going on over here, I've got to get that under control. There's a lot of unprocessed trauma around that for me. And there's a lot of things that I'm still grappling with. And I think I have buried a lot of that because I do remember when I was a little girl, my mother would say things to me. And I know she said them out of love to make us better and to make sure that we were tough and we were smart and that we could be better than what people thought or what people prescribed for us as little Black girls. But those things were hurtful to somebody who was autistic and who was really grappling with who she was, because my mother would say things like, Theresa, you're very smart, but you don't have common sense. And so as an autistic, you're listening to that and you're understanding that there are certain behavior traits that you have, and there are certain things that you say that are being frowned upon. So I, as a young child, never really understood what she meant by that. All I knew was the way it was positioned to me. Common sense is a good thing.
Where's your mother from, Theresa?
My mother is from the South.
Wow.
My mother is from the South. She was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. Bless her heart.
I'm marveled because what you're sharing resonates so much with me, with parents from Trinidad and a mother from Trinidad and Tobago who said precisely the same things that she said to you about, you can have book sense and not common sense. And, right?
Yes.
Like where they're from different places.
Yes.
But fundamentally that teaching has certainly been passed down. And again, to work twice as hard and be twice as good and or even to be half as good and compete, you have to do all of those things. And it's very interesting that through this series, I'm finding that common thread from Black women, no matter where our mothers were from. That's why I asked.
Yeah. And isn't that something too? Because in addition to the common sense piece of it, which she wanted to make sure I had, in addition to the book smarts, there were also some other behavioral things that she was seeing in me. And I won't go into the details and tell you what those things were, but I will tell you that because of this whole working twice as hard, I had to learn to minimize that piece of me, those pieces of me. I had to learn to make those things disappear, or at least to make you think that they had disappeared. So it's interesting that for a big part of my childhood, even though I didn't realize it, not only was I learning and being trained to be twice as good as everybody else, I also was learning and training myself how to appear neurotypical. And I didn't even know I was doing that. And I got so good at it. And it's so funny, as I said, I've been learning a lot from my son. And he and I often talk about the differences in our autistic journeys. And it's interesting because when my son and my daughter were growing up, that wasn't necessarily a message I gave to them in that way. I think for our parents and their generation, they delivered that message to us exactly the way that we received it. You've got to be twice as hard. You got to work twice as hard to be considered half as good. I didn't use those exact words, but I still delivered that message to my son and my daughter in the same way. And I think because I heard it the way that I heard it, and then having those experiences, it manifested itself differently in me, because whereas I was really good at appearing neurotypical, I mean, I can give you the best impression of somebody who's extroverted. I can give you the best impression of somebody who is funny and lively, but at the same time, knowing who I am and what I'm really like in my most private moments, and I'm really a private person, and then watching my son, who was really good at cloaking until all of his security defenses melted away. So again, I'm still processing through and learning on this journey, because I think that working twice as hard, it was so ingrained in me. I don't even know how to shed that. That's still very much a part of it. I don't know how to shed that. I don't know at what place that is just the mandate, or to what extent it's been so baked into my identity that I no longer am able to separate it out, because I still know that I can catch myself being neurotypical. I catch myself because it's so habitual, because you got to think about it. You become whatever you practice. And if you practice it long and hard enough, that has the power to overshadow your deeper innermost self, even though you still know your deepest and innermost self, because there are always flickers of it. But if you're not nurturing that part of you continues to be that private self, and you can sit and you continue to wear that mask that you project to everybody else. So it's mask and not mask, because something that you've practiced for so long, one could even say, well, that's still a part of you, isn't it? And I guess so in a way it is. Yeah. Isn't it? Yeah.
I'm smiling a lot because your story, your discovery of autism in adulthood is quite similar to my story of discovering that I have a learning disability in adulthood. You know, worked twice as hard and twice as good, and masked that I had a learning disability my entire life. Didn't know that I had one, because, like you said, I overcompensated in so many other ways. And like you said, in those private moments, you realize what your, maybe I should say shortcomings. For me, it was a shortcoming. I would say I've got high intellectual IQ, you know, but I've got a low reading comprehension. So my processing speed is slower. So to overcompensate for that, like you said, I mask, right? I've gotten by with the high IQ, and people wouldn't realize it, that I'm actually reading slower. So I went to university, for example, and I don't share the story of my learning disability, but here it is on full display. But I went to university, studied English literature, books and books and books and books is all over the curriculum, and never quite understood why it was I could never get through an entire textbook, right? By the time, you know, I'm on, you know, chapter 3, we're discussing it in class, and I haven't finished the book. So I'm masking that I've read the book, and I'm faking it till I make it. And my professors don't realize that I'm not reading the full text, and I'm writing essays, and I'm graduating from undergraduate with a degree from, you know, a pretty prestigious school in Toronto with, you know, a degree in English literature, but I've not read, I would say, 80% of the curriculum, right? Like, so I understand fully what you're saying. The ways in which, you know, we have to be twice as good and put that mask on so that people are not aware of what I'm saying are shortcomings. But my inability to read an entire textbook in an English literature program, I would say is probably my own little shortcoming that nobody knew about.
And I was going to ask you that too. I was going to ask you, as you were talking, I'm like, okay, I'm listening, and I could feel because that's another thing with me, my brain just shoots off in 50 million directions. So I'm wondering how many different ways that you have overcompensated that would overlap with what I've been doing that a lot of people may not realize. And I always say to people, you don't understand people's journey. Nobody understands your journey the way that you do. We look at people like in that moment, and, you know, as humans, we tend to judge. We tend to do so many things, but we just really, really don't know. But what are some other ways you have overcompensated? Because as I'm listening to you, it's bringing to mind things that I know I'm still doing, but it's also uncovering another piece, because when I heard you say about the reading, I thought about my own journey around that. You and I have so much in common, Janelle, because I actually went to uni and studied literature as well. And I laugh about some of the books that were required and that I should have read, that to this day I have managed to not ever read. And as you were talking, for some reason, Moby Dick came to mind as one of those. What? You studied literature and you've never ever read Moby Dick? Guess what? I'm just, full disclosure, I have never read that book. I have no intentions of ever reading that book. And I don't care what you think that I have not read that book, but I have not read that book. But I remember having to speak on themes from that book. I remember having to write papers on that book. I never read the whole thing, never read it. I may have just, okay, let me see if I can just get the gist of what's going on here.
And that's what we do.
The gist of it.
Well, we use our high intelligence to overcompensate for the speed, where speed is a factor. In my case, where speed is a factor, my processing for some reason and my reading comprehension goes down, but I overcompensate with the IQ, so I can pretend and skim and find what I need really quickly to tell anybody that I read that thing cover to cover. And I've used that throughout my life to get me by, to sort of have that kind of gloss and slick over whatever it is that I'm doing. Where time isn't a factor, I can read an entire book at my leisure and all as well. But I can tell you, did I read Chaucer's Canterbury Tales? No. Did I read, Dante's Inferno? I mean, that book was enjoyable, so maybe there were a lot of books that I went through and I never read them. In hindsight, it's like I had to really fake it till I make it. And again, it's that notion that we as Black women, we show up and we're working twice as hard. We can almost code switch. I feel like it's a form of code switching that we've been doing all of our lives.
But you know what though? When I think about what our parents and grandparents and even, beyond that, what they have instilled in us, there's a lot that we probably wouldn't necessarily call a superpower, but in a lot of ways, because we know how to pivot, we know how we want to show up or how we need to show up in certain spaces. I dare say that a lot of our experiences would be considered our superpower. I was thinking the other day about, I have a love of writing. And I actually love writing over speaking. And the reason why is because, like I mentioned to you earlier, my brain is just shooting off in different directions. When I write, I like to engage in a lot of wordplay, and I like to be able to take my time. It's my time, my space. That's like my art form, and I like to be able to do that. And I think a lot of it has to do with not only being autistic, but also just I'm extremely introverted. My energy comes from in here. So I like that time within myself to be able to curate what it is I want to say and to be able to take my time with it. I don't want to be on your time because you asked me something. And so now I must respond. And the minute the word comes out, the way it comes out, I'm now committed to that word, even though in the back of my autistic brain, I'm already thinking there was a better way for me to say that. There was another word or another expression that I really wanted to use. Real-time communication does not allow for that. Writing allows for that. When you are on the receiving end of something that I have written, you don't know what my process was. All you know is, here it is, this finished product, versus in the moment, here it is in that moment, but I may still be grappling with, oh, I should have said that, or I wanted to say this and I wanted to say it this way. There's so much of that going on with me because this right here is always working, always just spinning and spinning. But I think, again, going back to our parents and our grandparents and what they instilled in us, that was survival, Janelle. That was pure survival. And I think in my mother's case, she probably gave us a super, super, super heavy dose of it. So not only was she giving that message to 3 girls, but at the time of that message, there's 4 females in the house. And in my household, after the age of 7, there was no man in the house. And so it was all these women in the house, and Black women are still very much at the bottom of the deck when it comes to equity, when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to justice. We are still very much at the bottom. And so in my mom's mind, she was like strengthening us and fortifying us for what was to come. And even though I will tell people stories about some of the things my mom used to say and some of the things she used to do, and some of them are downright funny, because sometimes we have to just laugh at stuff just to keep from crying. But a lot of that stuff was survival. And I know people have mixed feelings about, Black girl magic, and people have mixed feelings about the strong Black woman. But I will just call it was survival in the face of just crushing trauma that just went unaddressed, that we were handed down, because my mom was dealing with her own trauma. She would have no idea that one of her daughters was autistic, and I had no frame of reference for that. And I'm actually embarrassed to say that I didn't even really understand what autism was until my sister-in-law said, you and Mark need to think about getting Max tested, because I think he has Asperger's. And of course, that was the most common name for what they refer to as high functioning autism. And I'm going, Asperger's, what's that? So we started doing some research, but I actually didn't even really understand it until I got older. But it makes me wonder how many of us go undiagnosed at young ages, because you talked about your learning disability, because our parents were like, okay, wait, now you got to be twice as hard, so we can't be having none of that.
Exactly. Get some common sense. Pop.
Exactly. We cannot be having none of that. And I think Sinbad even covered it in one of his comedy shows, where he's like, you know what? As a young child, I believe I had ADHD, but Black parents look at you and go, oh, we cannot be having that. So you sit down, be still. Don't you move. They're trying to make sure that you can be successful, so that you will not have anything about you that will cause you to be even more oppressed, because they knew the melanin was already going to be tough enough.
That's right. Yeah, you're speaking to conformity, right? The fact that we need to conform in so many ways and show up in the world in a particular way. We talked about this in another episode with Elizabeth Leiba. We talked about that, the notion of professionalism, and how do we deconstruct these notions that we've been taught to conform and show up in a certain way and be presentable and sit like this, and all of the decorum and the rules that we have to unlearn in order to just be able to just be our authentic selves, the people that we were born to be. But it's almost impossible, because we've been conditioned. We've been brainwashed for so long. And I think in a lot of ways, what you're pointing out through this conversation is the ways in which it has served us. It's definitely served us, because here we are, 2 Black women, successful in our own right, doing our thing, working independently for ourselves. But we've had to, at the same time, stifle almost parts of ourselves, so that people are not aware, right? I was grossly ashamed of the fact that I didn't read any of those books, and I could never go to a professor and say, I would look to my right or my left. I'd ask my classmates and say, "Are you finishing these books?" And they're like, "Yeah, I'm finishing them." But I could never admit that I wasn't, until now, that I never read all of these books. And so there's a lot of shame that we carry, right? You talk about intergenerational trauma and the things that your mother is passing down, coming down from my mother as well. But there's shame that sort of is ingrained in the notions of conformity and how to behave and what the expectations are. And if we come out of that, we're going to be ashamed, get back in place, get back in line. And it's part of this legacy, I think, of slavery almost, that we need to just whip, get back in line, get back in your place.
Oh yeah. Do you know how freeing that is though, Janelle? You know how freeing that is to be able to sit here with you, my sister, and be able to say, yes, I graduated with an advanced degree in literature, but I have not read Moby Dick. And that ain't the only thing I ain't read either.
Right?
How comfortable it is to code switch and not worry about you judging me. And I'm going to tell you something else too that we can laugh about, because I had some other girlfriends laughing. I will be turning 56 this year, and I am learning how to do my own hair. When that first shutdown came along, girl, I was not going out. So, you know, the roots started talking to me, and they were like, hey, here we are. What you gonna do?
Your hair is beautiful.
What you gonna do? So I was, oh my gosh, wait a minute. So we're what? So we're almost in March, right? 2-year anniversary is coming up for me in March. 2 years of wearing my natural hair. Had to learn, still learning. But you know what? I think about what that piece was as a journey for me, because I had always thought, you know what, as a facilitator that's in front of audiences all the time, and when I was doing the in-person work, my audiences were primarily white people. And in my head, I had this whole narrative going like, okay, these are the things I will not be able to do with my hair to be able to present to white folks. I won't be able to have braids. I won't be able to do the dreads. So you know what? I'll get the short little pixie cut, and I'll just relax it and wear it straight, and I'll just do that. That worked for me for a long time.
Me too. That was my look. That was my signature look.
That was the thing, girl. So listen, when the first shutdown happened and I couldn't get to the salon, things started happening, girl. Things started happening. Make a long story short, I was like, you know what? This is me. This is so freeing. And then I started thinking about all the good things that started happening. And I was like, you know what? I don't think I'm going back. I don't think I'm going back. And I had a couple of people that told me, oh, you'll be going back. Watch and see. As soon as those doors open, you'll be going back. So far, you hear that? I'm knocking on wood. I haven't been back yet, but I will tell you, to beat this quote unquote old, and I'm putting that in quotation marks because I pick it myself. It's been very interesting. And it's almost been like this new relationship with myself where, oh my gosh, I'm playing in my hair. I'm learning how to do my hair. That's huge for me. And I don't know if people will appreciate that, but that's huge for me. And that goes back to that twice as hard, because as a part of what our mother taught us, she also taught us how we have to appear physically, how we have to appear externally to the eyes of those onlookers who would compare us, who would dare to compare us. She even, lectured us and taught us on how we have to be physically in appearance. That was a part of it. It was the whole package message. So it wasn't just what you have to be up here, it's what you have to be everywhere. That was the total working twice as hard package that I got from my mom. I don't know about you, but it was the whole thing, the whole kahuna.
Speaking of working twice as hard, my little one is just making a guest appearance behind me. I'm just gonna mute the microphone for a second, Theresa, and get her out of here. Give me 1 second.
Okay, no worries.
Thank you for that brief indulgence, Theresa. I was just telling you that my little girl just made a guest appearance. We'll have to edit that piece out. But if you're still watching with us, don't forget to click subscribe down below, click like. I do want to acknowledge, just the fun that you're having playing with your hair, and the way that we can just show up and just be. We don't get that liberty because we're so busy conforming, and we've been told to conform for so long by our parents. And I think it's significant that the pandemic has really given us that opportunity to just breathe and be ourselves. I want to ask you, Theresa, just about the premise of Blaxhaustion. We talked a little bit about it at the beginning, but well, what is the premise? What behind Blaxhaustion? Tell us a little bit more.
My gosh, I almost hear the word and can just feel my whole body just sighing. I talk a lot about just being with and the energy. Black exhaustion for me is a term that I coined because I wanted something that would really convey our unique lived experiences as Black people, but particularly as Black women. So I'm combining the Black lived experience with just the whole idea of exhaustion. And everybody knows what exhaustion is. But when you factor in Blackness, oh my gosh, it just takes it to a whole nother level. And I use the expression bandwidth so much because I recognize that every single chip away at the core of who we are as Black people just adds another element to just how exhausted we get from the day to day. And a lot of people just assume that we over exaggerate, or we're just making, is it really every day, Theresa? Is it really that bad? Yes, it's that bad. Even the second guessing of your interactions when you're having to say, wait, did you just say what I thought you just said? Or where's that coming from? Just the constant questioning, the constant comments, the constant having to explain or to defend, things that are just basic humanity items. Even explaining what Blaxhaustion is exhausting because I don't feel like there are really any words to really convey what it is. I did it to the best of my ability because in the book, I actually provide what I think is this 10-point definition that gives you every single characteristic. But at the end of the day, unless you're Black, you won't understand it. You may have a frame of reference, but I typically will say to people, one of the many things that Black people will ask you is to honor our lived experiences. Honor that. Think about what that means, what that would look like, sound like, feel like. If that were in place, there would have never been a need for either an organization or a slogan called Black Lives Matter.
Right.
I understand the principle behind Black Lives Matter. It is much needed. No argument from me on that. But just the idea of mattering, the bar is too low. And that to me even adds to exhaustion, that we are still having to explain and to convince people that our lives matter, and when it more than matters, we are to be respected, appreciated, valued, celebrated. So don't even get me started talking about all of the interplays of Blaxhaustion and how it shows up in the book. And of course, Blaxhaustion is always in contrast to privilege and white supremacy and all this, just the system of whiteness overall, the complicity, the silence, everything. It's always in contrast to that, which is why some days I'm just too tired and I'm done. There's some days when I literally have to check out. There are days when I just have to say, I said what I said. I wrote what I wrote. And I make a big point of that in the book. And that's something that I found myself writing over and over again. I wrote what I wrote. I said what I said. I'm done. And then my new pivot around that, Janelle, is you are not my assignment. that's what I've taken to, because I will not debate with willful and purposeful bigots and haters. I've decided I'm not doing that. I will just let you know you are not my assignment. And I will just release them into their hate.
Yeah, you have to release some people to the world. And, you know, as diversity and inclusion practitioner myself, people always say, you know, can't you fix everyone? Can't you, you know, correct the bias within everybody? And shouldn't you, you know, be a little bit more tolerant and patient? And because I lose it sometimes, and you know, I'm giving them a tongue lashing, especially online. But I will say that, yeah, I don't have to save every single person. Not everybody can be saved. There are people that you're going to have to let go, and they're going to have to hold fast to those views and die with them. And that's okay. I have to, you know, own my own Blaxhaustion and let those people go. Theresa, where can people receive your book, or if they want to purchase it, where can they find it?
Okay, so you can go on my website and you can order it there, or you can go on Amazon. And I'm saying that only because I'm one of those people that I always self-publish, because I like to maintain complete control of the words I use. And so right now, because I do always self-publish my books, you can find them on Amazon, but you can also find it on my website as well.
And your website is?
TheresaMRobinson.com.
Thank you so much, Theresa.
Yeah.
Just your name. And you can also reach her at Theresa M. Robinson on LinkedIn. Theresa, it has been such a pleasure having you as a guest on Twice as Hard. I've enjoyed this conversation and this chat so much, and I know that the viewers will as well. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe down below, and we'll see you next time for another episode. Thank you, Theresa.
Thank you, Janelle. Such a pleasure to chat.
It was really great. Thank you.